This story begins on a rainy night, in a temple that seems to have been invaded as its door has been knocked down. We then see a group of uniformed men entering and asking if there's anyone in that place. As the rain continues to pour, a boy appears at the temple entrance. For a moment, no one says anything, only the sounds of thunder in the background can be heard. The man in the center looks at the boy with his red eyes, wondering how it could be possible for someone to still live in that abandoned martial arts academy. The man asks the boy if they can stay there for the night to avoid the rain. The boy says nothing but wonders who these people are and why they are greeting him so politely, given that he's just a child. Maybe they think he's just a young Taoist guarding that closed academy? Regardless, he figures they must not be bad people, so he says that he's been living in that abandoned place for a few years now, and since it's not really his, they can stay wherever they like. However, the boy also mentions that he's using one of the pavilions as his home and asks them to choose another one to stay in. The group's leader thanks him and says they'll do just that. He orders his men to stay away from the boy's pavilion and to find other shelters. They all agree and call the man patriarch. They then disperse to look for places to shelter. The boy can't help but notice the same symbol on their clothing. All of them bear the Tang symbol. He guesses they must be part of the same clan and becomes curious to learn more about them. For now, though, he has more important things to do. He heads back home and says it's already lunchtime for the children. He starts walking happily, a stark contrast to his earlier demeanor, and calls out to everyone, saying it's time to eat. He opens a container, and inside are some strange insects. Could these be the children he was talking about? The boy says he almost ran late and that they must be starving. Then he opens another container, revealing a massive spider with a symbol on its back. This spider is called the Earth Black Tiger, a tarantula native to Heian, China. It's a rare species that grows up to 20 centimeters, with a striped pattern on its back resembling a black tiger. We then realize those insects weren't his children because he grabs one and feeds it to the spider, asking what it would do without him to provide food. The spider seems to enjoy it as it starts tearing the poor insect apart. The boy marvels at the fact that this spider was once the size of a fingernail and feels overjoyed at how quickly it's grown. Satisfied that his spider is well fed, he moves on to the next little creature. He opens a drawer, revealing a small orange gecko with white stripes, a bewangling cave gecko. As the protagonist feeds another insect to the gecko, a bug that's clearly not thrilled with its fate, we see that this gecko also has an unusual stripe pattern on its body, just like the spider. The boy mentions that this gecko was incredibly hard to find in his previous life because he didn't have much money. But now, he can just wander anywhere and easily find more of this species, saying he lives for the joy of caring for these little creatures. He tries to pet the gecko, but it bites his finger hard. As he tries to pull it off, we're finally given an explanation about this previous life business. Basically, before reincarnating into this current body, he was none other than a streamer. And he was quite famous, boasting an impressive 1 million subscribers. And yet he claims he had no money. He was known as Spicy Fabre, a biologist who made videos like The Story of a Man Who Had a Staring Contest with a Snake. That was his main content, talking about venomous animals and insects from around the world. Things seemed to be going well, but the trouble began when he did a live stream to celebrate reaching 1 million subscribers. His chat was upset because he simply didn't have a black mamba to show them, one of the 10 most dangerous snakes in the world. He even traveled to Africa and spent a long time searching for the snake. But one day, he decided to take a break because he was tired. And just as he put his hand on top of his fridge at home, there it was, a black mamba curled up right there. Before he even had time to react, the snake bit him hard on his right hand. The chat grew concerned, with some even trying to call an ambulance, but it was already too late. Without medical attention, he died right there, live on stream, killed by the very snake he'd worked so hard to find. Back in the present, the protagonist managed to shake off the gecko's bite. He's then called by the leader of the clan, who appears at his door, asking if he's home. The protagonist quickly hides the gecko and goes to answer the door, asking if something's wrong. The man is only there to thank him for sheltering them from the rain and to ask if the protagonist would like to join them for dinner. He mentions they caught a deer, and the protagonist is stunned upon hearing this. That's because it had been ages since he'd eaten decent meat. All this time living alone after reincarnating, he'd only managed to eat snake and lizard meat. He's overjoyed and says he'd be very grateful if they could share some with him. They then walk further into the temple. The rain has stopped, and the men have made a fire with a large chunk of meat roasting over it, making the protagonist salivate just from the smell. The man warns that the meat will take a few more minutes to be ready and asks if he can ask the protagonist a few questions in the meantime. The boy grows nervous, feeling like he's drawn too much attention, but he still says that the man, whom the protagonist refers to as Elder, can ask as many questions as he likes. The Elder asks how old the protagonist is and whether he really lives alone in the mountains. The protagonist says he thinks he's about 14 or 15 years old, which the Elder finds odd. Why doesn't he know? The protagonist realizes he can't reveal that he reincarnated from another world, so he decides to lie, saying he hit his head when he was younger and doesn't remember much. The Elder says that's plausible and asks if he's been living there alone all this time. The protagonist replies yes, explaining that he doesn't have any special talents, venomous, so he just roams around catching snakes and selling their skins to survive. The elder remarks that it sounds dangerous, but the protagonist says it's no problem since he's used to doing it every day. One of the men appears and says a portion of the meat is already cooked. The protagonist's eyes light up, knowing he can finally eat. The elder notes that he must be starving, and the protagonist thanks them for the meat, saying it's been so long since he's had anything like it. The protagonist eats the meat, and judging by his expression, it's the most delicious thing he's had in years. The leader of the warriors says the protagonist can listen while he eats, then explains that they're actually looking for something in the area and want to know if the protagonist has seen anything unusual lately. The protagonist asks what they mean by unusual. The patriarch hesitates to say, but the elder argues that they owe the young man a favor and can tell him. After all, since the protagonist doesn't know exactly what they're looking for, he won't get himself into trouble. And living alone, he wouldn't have anyone to tell either. The patriarch agrees and calls the elder father. The patriarch tells the protagonist what they're looking for, but we aren't told what it is. Instead, we see the protagonist's shocked reaction as he realizes that he hasn't just traveled centuries into the past but has, in fact, reincarnated into another world. Whatever it is, the elder assures the protagonist that he doesn't need to worry because they'll capture it. But the protagonist asks if they're going to capture the creature to take care of it, which confuses the two men. They laugh at the question, calling him a funny kid, and finally reveal that the creature they're after is a blue-spotted centipede and that they actually plan to use it as medicine. The protagonist finds this strange. He had assumed they were merchants, but now he thinks they might actually be drug traffickers. He asks what kind of medicine can be made from the centipede. The elder explains that his granddaughter is bedridden with a severe illness, and the centipede's core is the only thing that can save her life. The protagonist doubts that a centipede can really be used as medicine, but he understands that parents will do anything to try to save their children. They're likely desperate to stop her from dying. He admits that he feels sorry for the centipede, but decides to help the men because they helped him and even shared their food with him. The protagonist mentions the centipede, and the patriarch grows excited, thinking the protagonist has seen it somewhere. Unfortunately for him, the protagonist hasn't seen the creature, but he smiles and says he knows a place where they might be able to find one. After all, even though he died because of a venomous snake, he confidently believes he knows more about venomous animals than anyone else. Of the 8 million known species, around 20,000 are known to be venomous, and he has all the information about these animals stored in his head, including centipedes. The protagonist accesses the information in his mind as if he were reading an entire book in one go. After thinking for a moment, he says he might know where to find the centipede. They ask him where they can find it. The protagonist asks them to specify exactly which areas they've already searched and when those searches were conducted. They explain that they searched to the north and east of the area during the day, focusing mostly along the northern riverbank. The protagonist tells them it's no wonder they haven't found anything so far. When they ask him to explain why, he gives them a biology lesson. Basically, these centipedes have a large territory, and being cold-blooded, they need shelter to regulate their body temperature and humidity during the day. And since they don't have a very effective waterproof exoskeleton, they tend to avoid damp areas like rivers. In short, they're creatures that need humidity to survive, but not too much. He concludes by explaining that they won't find it near forests or rivers. The elder is surprised by the boy's knowledge, saying he always thought centipedes like to hide in tight spaces like cracks in rotten wood. The protagonist explains that while smaller centipedes might be found there, since the elder mentioned they're looking for a giant centipede, that's not the case. Moreover, beyond the reasons he already listed, another reason they wouldn't be in forests or rivers is that it's hard for them to hide in such places. Now that they know where not to look, they ask where they can find it. The patriarch promises a great reward if they find it based on the boy's information. Hearing this, the protagonist smiles and points west, saying they might find one in the Rocky Mountains to the west. That's because centipedes like to rest on warm rocks during the day and roam around at night. The group sets off to search, but they seem to be having no luck. The patriarch climbs a rock to get a better view. One of the men asks if the boy's information might have been wrong. The patriarch still has doubts, so he decides to call off the search for the day and orders a signal arrow to be fired to alert the rest of the team. After the arrow is sent, everyone gathers around the campfire. It's clear the group still isn't sure whether they can trust the boy's information. One of them grumbles, asking why that damn centipede hasn't shown up yet, saying the boy seemed so knowledgeable. Meanwhile, the patriarch sits silently, staring into the fire. He reflects on his daughter, Won, who was once considered the greatest talent in the history of the Tang clan, and wonders if the heavens have truly given up on saving her. Just then, one of the men announces that the elder has returned. The elder meets his son and asks if they also had no luck finding the centipede. The elder explains that he too found nothing and expresses his worry since his granddaughter can only hold on for about 3 more months. But even so, they only have 10 days to find the centipede and return home in time. Now, he's not sure it will be possible. The patriarch suggests they explore the south the next day, and the elder, with no other choice, agrees since they haven't found even a trace of the centipede. But at that moment, the elder suddenly realizes something he hadn't noticed before, that the fact they found nothing, despite searching so much, is actually a good sign. The patriarch doesn't understand what he means, so the elder asks him and the warriors if they've noticed anything strange. After thinking for a while, they realize that since they arrived in the mountains, they haven't seen any traces of animals at all. This is because the centipede is a territorial creature, and it's likely that the other animals in the area either fled or became the centipede's food. This means the centipede is definitely nearby. Their hope of curing Won is reignited, but their celebration is cut short when the entire mountain begins to shake out of nowhere. All the soldiers brace themselves for the worst when suddenly, a massive explosion occurs, sending some of them flying. They look on in shock, unable to believe what they're seeing. Out of nowhere, a gigantic blue centipede bursts from the ground, and everyone prepares for battle. The creature is so massive that the protagonist can hear the commotion from his house in the distance. He wonders how big it must be to cause such a ruckus and thinks that while he told them where to search, they're now turning the entire mountain upside down. Despite everything, the protagonist can't help but feel curious about the situation. He's tempted to go and see the giant centipede for himself, even though it could swallow him in one bite. No wonder he died in his previous life. Back on the mountain, these guys really know how to fight, because during this time skip, they completely obliterated the centipede, and they even managed to retrieve the core they needed. They start crying because now they can finally cure Won. The patriarch tells his father to return to Sichuan to deliver the core and tend to the injured warriors. He says, grievances are carved in blood and favors in stone. Translation, they almost forgot to go back to the protagonist's home to thank him for his help and give him the reward he deserves. The elder says it would be proper to welcome the protagonist as a guest and grant him whatever he asks for. The patriarch then heads off to visit the protagonist, saying he's probably very curious to hear about their great battle. We then cut to the protagonist, who is now surrounded by several baby centipedes, saying that overnight, he somehow became their father. He had placed some eggs he found on his nightstand after cleaning them, but when he woke up, they had hatched without him noticing. The little critters keep tugging at his hair and clothes. While the protagonist kind of likes them, he's starting to get annoyed because they won't leave him alone. But wait, when did he even get those eggs? We flash back to the night before, while the patriarch's group was fighting. As the curious streamer he is, the protagonist did, in fact, go into the forest to check out the giant centipede. He even says that if he didn't go, he couldn't call himself Spicy Fabre. This lunatic went straight into the heart of the blue centipede's lair. He wandered deep inside until he finally found something. Way in the back, he fought with a few creatures, and after that, he was exhausted. Even so, he found 3 centipede eggs and took them with him. Luckily, the rain had already stopped by then. He tied the bag with the eggs to his waist and said he needed to get home to clean them. Back at home, he lamented not being able to see the giant centipede alive, but at least he managed to save the babies. Now, he's still annoyed with the baby centipedes. He mentions they won't need food until they shed their skin at least twice, but they're still super annoying because they cling to his body all the time. Then he has an idea. He'll jump into the water to make them let go. And just mentioning a bath makes the centipedes tremble in fear. Cut to the patriarch, who has finally arrived at the temple and asks if the protagonist is home. When he doesn't get a response, he decides to just go in anyway. He starts exploring the house and notices some jars the protagonist keeps, thinking the boy might be some kind of medicine practitioner or something. But then he feels embarrassed and says it's not right to invade someone's house and mess with their things. He considers leaving and coming back later, but then he hears a strange noise coming from one of the jars. When he moves closer to check it out and opens the jar, it turns out to be the one with that spider from before. The patriarch is startled and starts checking out the other drawers. He comes face to face with all the creatures the protagonist has been raising, the gecko, and even some new ones that hadn't been introduced yet. He can't believe the protagonist is raising venomous creatures. He reflects on how even the Tang clan, with all their expertise in poisons and venomous creatures, could only extract venom from them. The patriarch thought his only stroke of luck was saving his daughter, but in truth, his real luck was meeting that young warrior. As he leaves the temple, he encounters the protagonist carrying a few jars. The boy asks what happened to his arm and whether he's hurt. The man brushes it off, saying it's nothing, and tries to tell the boy that he has something for him. But he's cut off as he suddenly senses an overwhelming energy coming from the temple's entrance. When he looks more closely, there's a muscular man standing there, exuding an absurdly powerful aura. This man doesn't even seem human, and his bloodshot eyes are fixed on them. The patriarch orders the boy to get out of there and then charges at the enemy. The two rush at each other, trading blow after blow. The enemy seems to be enjoying the battle, and despite his broken arm, the patriarch is managing to hold his own. That is until the enemy suddenly unleashes what looks like a Kamehameha straight into the patriarch's face. And obviously, after taking that kind of attack, the patriarch is severely injured. He realizes that the enemy is a master on the same level as his father and shouts for the protagonist to run. But it's already too late. The enemy grabs the boy by the neck. Finally, the man speaks. He says he heard that the cursed Tang clan had come to Heian and never imagined that the son of the poison sovereign would be here all alone. The patriarch struggles to stand and says he doesn't know who this man is, asking asking why he's targeting him and the boy. The enemy asks if he still doesn't recognize him. Just by looking at his face and his red hand, it should be obvious who he is. He introduces himself as the Rakshasa of the Bloody Hand, and his name is Takunyang. Finally, another character with a name in this manhwa, Titi. He reveals that the elder, the patriarch's father, is the one who left him so badly injured. The patriarch has heard of him. Apparently, Takunyang had taken a direct hit from his father's poisonous palm to the head and even fallen off a cliff afterward. It's astonishing that he's still alive. The patriarch pleads with Unyang, saying the boy has nothing to do with this and asking him to spare the protagonist in exchange for his life. But Unyang scoffs, saying that in the patriarch's dreams would he spare the boy. He declares that he'll kill anyone who's had contact with the Tang clan. The patriarch realizes that Unyang has no intention of letting the protagonist live and is at a loss for what to do, as he's already coughing up blood and barely hanging on. The protagonist, almost out of air, tries to beg Unyang to spare him, but it's not enough. The giant simply glares at him and tells him to die. The protagonist's vision begins to darken, and all he can see are Unyang's glowing eyes. Just as he's about to pass out, the baby centipedes that were with him suddenly appear and start crawling all over Unyang's body, biting him. The giant is confused, but he mocks the effort, saying that even with centipedes attacking him, it's useless, they can't hurt him. But then he stops talking when, out of nowhere, he starts coughing up blood. He drops the protagonist and collapses to the ground. That's when the protagonist realizes that Unyang was killed by the centipede's venom. The boy, now nervous, asks if the guy really was a bad person, right? But the patriarch just stands there, jaw dropped, unable to believe what he just witnessed. Then, he breaks into a wide grin and declares that this young boy is no mere guest. Meanwhile, the protagonist remains terrified over the fact that he just killed someone. All the patriarch can think is that this boy must join his clan immediately. We cut to a few days after the fight with Unyang. The patriarch still seems in bad shape after taking such a beating, so the protagonist decides to take care of him. The man thanks him, and the protagonist suggests that instead of just thanking him, he could tell him where his companions are so the protagonist can check on them. But then he remembers he can't just leave the injured patriarch alone, and there's no way to call a doctor. The patriarch assures him he'll recover soon after a few days of rest. The protagonist is surprised that the man can talk normally after coughing up blood just a few minutes ago. He insists that the patriarch is in critical condition. Still, the patriarch insists he's fine. After all, he's a martial artist. Curious, the protagonist asks if martial artists are like the guys who can fly and shoot fireballs or something like that. The patriarch laughs, saying not everyone can do those things, but yes, it's something along those lines. The protagonist finally accepts that this is indeed a parallel world. After all, only in such a world could there be a giant centipede wandering around. The patriarch says he owes his life to the protagonist and formally introduces himself, so we can stop calling him patriarch. His name is Tang Keelsan from the Tang clan of Sichuan. The protagonist introduces himself as well. His name in this world is Wei Soryong. Keelsan likes the name, pointing out that So means small and Ryong means dragon. Keelsan has many questions for Soryong, starting with the centipedes. The protagonist explains that they're blue-spotted centipedes, and the patriarch is amazed that he's capable of domesticating such creatures. Keelsan also admits that he snooped around Soryong's house and saw the other creatures he's raising. The protagonist is embarrassed but says he'll explain everything. However, it's a long story, so he tells Keelsan to pay attention. The scene cuts to Soryong finishing his story, and when he mentions that he could predict when the centipede eggs would hatch, Keelsan asks how that's possible. Soryong doesn't respond right away. Instead, he opens a drawer and pulls out two of the striped geckos from before. What's strange is that one of them not only lacks stripes but also has an entirely white tail. Soryong explains that he bred two geckos with larger stripes on their tails, and the result was one with a completely white tail. Seeing this, Keelsan realizes that Soryong can combine species to create new traits and even new colors. If he wanted, he could theoretically crossbreed two venomous species to create an even more potent venom. Soryong agrees it's possible, but they'd need to determine which species has the stronger venom first, which isn't easy to figure out. Keelsan, excited by this potential, immediately invites Soryong to join the Tang clan. In return, Keelsan promises to teach him all their martial arts techniques and give him access to any elixirs or poisons he desires. Additionally, there are rare herbs that only Soryong might be able to cultivate, and he might even have the potential to master the 10 great legendary venomous creatures of the Central Plains in this martial arts world. As if that weren't enough, Keelsan also offers his daughter's hand in marriage. At first, Soryong seems excited about this, but he quickly changes the subject, wanting to learn more about the 10 legendary creatures Keelsan mentioned. He asks if they're as amazing as the blue-spotted centipede. Keelsan assures him they are, explaining that the centipede is ranked far below the legendary creatures of the plains. He also says Soryong can expect creatures ranging from giant scorpions to glowing frogs, creatures that far exceed imagination. The description leaves Soryong visibly excited, and seeing this, Keelsan is pleased, thinking he's successfully convinced him. 2 days after this conversation, the other members of the the Tang clan arrive at the temple and learn about the attack by Eun-yang. Keel-san explains that Eun-yang was likely in hiding, perfecting his martial arts, and that he was at the same level as Keel-san's father. One of the soldiers asks if, since Keel-san defeated him and sent him to the afterlife, he must have reached the realm of 10,000 poisons. But the patriarch clarifies that he didn't defeat Eun-yang. In fact, it was Soryong who killed him. The soldiers are shocked to learn that Soryong is a warrior. They thank him for saving the patriarch's life, even asking if he's an elder who's been rejuvenated. This leaves Soryong completely flustered. Keel-san interrupts, explaining there's been a misunderstanding, and asks Soryong to show the centipedes to them. Soryong does so, explaining that it was the centipedes that killed Eun-yang. The soldiers are in disbelief that someone can actually domesticate such insects. Keel-san uses this moment to explain why he invited Soryong to join the clan, but Soryong says he needs more time to think about it. The warriors insist it would be a great opportunity for him. Keel-san then stands up and says it's time for him to leave. Concentrating a blue aura in his hand, he says he can't afford to delay. Soryong asks if he's still searching for something in the area. Keel-san explains that Eun-yang practiced a martial art called Bloody Hand Venom Claw, an evil technique that requires human blood and bone marrow to reach a certain stage. The protagonist is baffled, wondering what kind of crazy martial art that is. Keel-san says that if Eun-yang left behind any scrolls containing the technique or had any disciples who learned it, they must find and eliminate them to ensure the technique doesn't spread further. He also says they must rescue anyone who might have been captured by Eun-yang. Finally, he asks for Soryong's help since he knows the island's geography better than anyone. Soryong realizes that joining the clan would be a lifelong commitment, and in his past life, it was a general rule during internships to evaluate the company you were going to work for, as well as your boss's character. He agrees to help, but only once Keel-san has fully recovered. The patriarch tells him he's made the right choice. Soryong smiles and says that if it's to save lives, of course he should help. But in his mind, he's planning to use this opportunity to learn more about the Tang clan. After all, skilled individuals always conduct a reverse job interview with the companies they join. It took 3 days for Keel-san to fully recover. Before setting out on their journey, they stopped in a village near the temple where Soryong lived, hoping to find the base where Eun-yang was hiding. As a precaution, they asked the villagers if there had been any recent disappearances. The village chief confirmed that some people had gone missing in the forest, but these incidents had ceased in the last few days. They thanked the villagers for their help and set off, but unfortunately, they couldn't find any other clues that might lead them to the base. Soryong asked if there was anything special about that village. Keel-san explained that when Eun-yang revealed himself, he thought the base might be nearby, but of course, it wouldn't be that easy to find. The protagonist found it odd that there were no traces of Eun-yang around, but then he remembered what Eun-yang had said during their battle about several members of the Tang clan being in Hainan. He asked if Keel-san recalled that statement. The patriarch admitted he didn't, prompting Soryong to note that Keel-san was probably too busy getting slapped in the face at the time to hear it. Soryong explained that someone must have informed Eun-yang about the Tang clan passing through, so to find his base, they needed to investigate all the places the Tang clan had visited since arriving in Hainan. He even suggested they could show a picture of Eun-yang to confirm if anyone had seen him around. They then traveled toward one of the villages the Tang clan had passed through, hoping a resident might recognize Eun-yang. From a distance, they spotted the village, and it was evident that the people there were suffering from some kind of illness. One of the soldiers mentioned that this village was inhabited by people known as the Lei. The patriarch said they should head there since Soryong had assured him that the Lei would not be hostile toward them. Upon entering the village, the atmosphere was dreadful, and the residents didn't even seem to notice their arrival. An elderly man holding a young girl's hand eventually approached and asked what they were doing there. The patriarch introduced himself and explained their purpose to the old man. Meanwhile, Soryong observed the villagers and noticed that everyone had a lifeless look in their eyes, including the frail-looking child with the elder. Upon closer inspection, Soryong realized that everyone in the village appeared sickly, as if they had consumed something harmful. Despite all this, the old man insisted that no one had gone missing and that there was nothing unusual about the village. The patriarch tried to converse, pointing out that there seemed to be fewer people than there were houses, but the old man cut him off. Referring to them as Han, he declared that it wasn't their problem and demanded they leave immediately. The patriarch turned to Soryong, questioning why he had said the Lei would be friendly, leaving Soryong momentarily speechless. Then, suddenly, the young girl named Mijin collapsed. The old man cradled her in his arms, panicking and fearing she was dead, revealing that she was his last remaining relative. Keel-san offered his assistance, mentioning that he had learned some medical arts and asking if he could try to help. He clarified that while he wasn't a doctor, he did have some knowledge of medicine. The elder agreed and finally disclosed that a plague had recently begun spreading through the village, claiming the lives of children and afflicting even the healthy adults. Grateful for Keel-san's offer to help, the elder allowed the group into the village to begin treating the girl. As they hurried inside, Soryong inquired about Keel-san's medical arts. One of the soldiers explains that, since the Tang clan specializes in poisons, they inevitably develop a strong knowledge of medicine as well. Additionally, because martial arts require an understanding of the human body, that knowledge also plays a part. This piques Soryong's interest, as he initially thought the Tang clan was just a group of assassins who used poison as a weapon. Now he realizes it might be worth learning medical arts instead of focusing solely on poisons. However, another soldier brings up the assassin clan aspect again when he mentions that sometimes they capture criminals and inject them with poison just to observe their reactions. This only makes Soryong even more wary of the Tang clan. The day passes, and inside one of the village houses, the girl seems to be recovering. Keel-san explains that he transferred some of his ki to the girl, which temporarily stabilized her breathing. The elder thanks him, begging them to save her since she is his only granddaughter. Keel-san remarks that there's something strange about her pulse and asks if she has had a weak heart since birth. The elder explains that it has been about half a year since she and other villagers started feeling unwell. They call it a mysterious illness, which is why he told them to leave earlier, to avoid catching it themselves. Keel-san says he has a remedy that might help and asks for all the villagers to be gathered. The elder begins crying, unsure of how to properly express his gratitude. However, Soryong notices that Keel-san seems to be hiding something. The scene cuts to the patriarch walking through the village after examining the villagers. A soldier named Gu Pei praises him for taking such good care of them. Pei asks about the symptoms they're experiencing. Keel-san explains that the symptoms are unusual, ranging from lethargy and swollen eyes to mild fever and irregular pulses. Furthermore, the symptoms vary by individual, with the most severe cases affecting the heart. Pei asks where Soryong is, and Keel-san explains that he was exhausted, so he let him rest in a room for now. We see Soryong fainting from fatigue, which Keel-san says is normal since Soryong has been following them this whole time without knowing anything about martial arts. Naturally, it's taken a toll on him. After finishing his rounds, Keel-san decides to check on Soryong to see how he's doing. The scene cuts to Soryong's room, where he's peacefully sleeping alongside his centipedes. Keel-san quietly enters the room and sneaks over to him. But as he gets close, for some reason, Soryong raises his hand and smacks Keel-san right in the face with full force. This, of course, jolts Soryong awake, and he leaps out of bed, completely confused about what just happened. The protagonist asks again why Keel-san suddenly slapped him, saying that it hurt. Keel-san apologizes and explains that he did it because there was an insect crawling on him. We see there really was a beetle on Soryong's face, and the patriarch says he acted instinctively to protect the boy in case it was a venomous insect. He shows the beetle to Soryong, who immediately recognizes it and wonders what such an insect is doing there. Soryong asks again about the symptoms of the villagers, whether all of them suffer from irregular heartbeats. The patriarch confirms this. That's when Soryong realizes the cause of the illness in the village might very well be this insect. He identifies the creature as a kissing bug, also known as a barber bug. It earned this name because it sucks blood from around people's eyes and mouths. These bugs are incredibly stealthy and extract blood even more discreetly than mosquitoes. That's why they're also called vampires or assassin bugs. Soryong explains further, saying that the insects themselves aren't venomous, but they carry numerous parasites in their stomachs. If someone is bitten, it's easy to become infected with these parasites. He mentions that they can cause Chagas disease and are ranked 7th on the list of animals that kill the most humans worldwide. He asks if the village dogs tire quickly or show symptoms similar to those of the humans. The elder confirms they do. Now that Soryong knows what's going on, he tells them he might be able to save the villagers if he has the right medicine. Keel-san and Pei listen to Soryong's explanation, their faces filled with pride, as if they're just waiting for the kid to officially join their clan. The patriarch then tells Soryong that, as members of the Tang clan, they are familiar with numerous parasites, including one called the Gu. Some even consider it a form of sorcery. But the key point is that it's created by malicious individuals in China. These parasites are used to control people or to inflict maximum pain on them. Keel-san explains that many warriors have died from this parasite or been forced to commit heinous crimes, even against their own families, because of it. He says all of this in front of the elder, who begins trembling with fear. Because of such atrocities, countless people sought an antidote for the parasite. The patriarch proudly explains that the clan that discovered a cure for this parasite was none other than the Great Tang clan. He starts boasting, saying that compared to the Gu parasite, a mere insect is nothing to them. He then introduces the Grand Curse-Melting Orb, which Soryong sarcastically notes is a very fancy name for a simple antiparasitic remedy. Keel-san tells the elder not to worry because they have what it takes to save his granddaughter's life. The scene cuts to the villagers taking the medicine that Keel-san provides. The village chief hugs his granddaughter, who has now recovered. The villagers throw a grand banquet to celebrate. Ever humble, Keel-san says it would have been impossible to save everyone if Soryong hadn't identified the cause of the illness. He insists that all gratitude should go to him. The villagers thank Soryong, calling him the savior of their village. Soryong notices that Keel-san is deliberately giving him all the credit for saving the village and sees him smiling with satisfaction as the protagonist receives the praise. This gesture makes Soryong deeply grateful to the patriarch. patriarch. Sometime later, the village chief asks about what Keel-san had mentioned when they arrived, about searching for missing people. Wanting to repay them for saving his granddaughter, the elder shares a strange story he recently heard. One of the village women, originally from a more distant village, told him that people in her hometown had started disappearing a few years ago. Realizing they might have found a lead on Eun-yang's base, they ask where this woman's village is. The elder says it's a small village to the west, and the scene cuts. Keel-san's group arrives at the location the elder indicated, where they find a gate leading to a cave. The situation worsens when they see that the area around the cave is not only filled with poison but also littered with corpses. One of the soldiers tries to cover Soryong's eyes as if he were a child, but Soryong says he's already seen everything anyway. Then, one of them spots something unusual. A strange bird is holding a snake's head in its beak. The bird is enormous, and it begins devouring the snake's remains. Pei becomes furious at the creature, saying he won't let it dishonor the dead like that. He throws a rock at the giant bird, but it only serves to further irritate the creature. The bird glares at them with bloodlust, and Keel-san senses that something is wrong. The bird stands tall, spreads its wings, and begins releasing a type of smoke. The smoke melts everything it touches, including the bones of the corpses lying on the ground. Keel-san quickly covers Soryong's mouth to prevent him from breathing in the fumes and pulls him back. He orders everyone to retreat, recognizing the creature immediately. It's a legendary venomous bird known as the Jinyao. They manage to escape, and Keel-san explains the nature of the bird. It appears even larger when it spreads its wings, its beak is bronze, and its entire body is covered in deep purple feathers. When it opens its wings, everything around it darkens and withers, turning into poison. Lastly, it has a golden cord on its head, which Keel-san describes as a majestic presence known as Jin or Jinyao. Soryong asks if this might be one of the 10 great venomous creatures that Keel-san mentioned earlier. Keel-san confirms that not only is it one of them, but it's actually the top ranked among the 10, also known as the king of all poisons. This excites Soryong far more than it should. He thinks about how even the most venomous snakes on Earth don't come close to it. It's like a flying biological weapon. The patriarch explains that the creature was drawn to venomous snakes and, as they saw, it seems to eat only the heads of these snakes. He tells Soryong that the bird is extremely rare, and a person might only get to see one once in 100 years. Upon hearing that, Soryong immediately channels his inner Pokemon master and asks if it's possible to capture the bird. Keel-san, proud of the boy's determination, asks if he really wants to try. Soryong admits that he would love to, but the venom seems far too dangerous to approach. Even so, the patriarch gets on board with the idea and tells him that if he truly wants to do it, there is a way. By learning the secret poison techniques of the Tang clan, he could potentially become immune to all the poisons in the world. Keel-san says he would love to teach these techniques to Soryong, but unfortunately, they can't be taught to outsiders. So too bad for him. That's when Soryong asks the exact question Keel-san wanted to hear. He asks if he can join the clan, and if doing so would allow him to become immune to all poisons in the world, even that of the Jinyao. Keel-san immediately confirms that it would. He tells Soryong that if he accepts right now, the patriarch will teach him everything he knows for free. He also asks Soryong to take good care of the gift he's given him. Then, he starts messing with Soryong, saying that if he takes too long to decide, he might have to reconsider the offer. Frustrated, Soryong snaps back, saying that in that case, he'll accept. As a member of the Tang clan, he will now await the teachings of the elder, or rather, his new patriarch. Keel-san grins and declares that from now on and forever, Soryong is part of the family. They return to the cave where Eun-yang had been hiding, and now that the Jinyao has left, they are able to enter. Inside, they find a book written in blood, which Keel-san confirms was used to document the techniques of the Bloody Hand Venom Claw art. Since they weren't able to rescue anyone, Keel-san decides it's best to return to Sichuan now. After all, they've acquired both the gem needed to heal his daughter and the manual of the dark techniques. Soryong asks if they can stop by his temple first so he can release the animals he's been keeping there. The patriarch agrees, as he also needs to gather his belongings. Just before they leave, Soryong notices something glowing near the cave entrance. Upon getting closer, they realize it's a feather from the Jinyao. Keel-san says Soryong deserves to keep it as a welcome gift, since he noticed how fascinated the boy was when he saw the feather. Soryong thanks him, momentarily fumbling over how to address Keel-san as patriarch. Keel-san says he doesn't like how Soryong called him just now, but that will change once he properly joins the clan and goes through the ceremony. Soryong assumes he's talking about the Tang clan's initiation ceremony, but from Keel-san's tone, it seems like he's referring to something else entirely. That, however, is a story for another time. Meanwhile, at the Tang clan, the great patriarch, the old man we saw before, also Keel-san's father, finally reveals his full name, Tang Muzong. He had actually left before Keel-san and has just now returned to the clan. The first thing he does is ask about Won. He's anxious to know if she's still alive. Despite his injuries, the clan members help him reach her room. When he arrives, we see Won still unconscious, surrounded by servants. One of them, however, isn't actually a servant but her mother, as Muzong calls her daughter-in-law. More importantly, he presents the centipede core, the key to saving her life. Upon seeing it, her mother nearly breaks down in tears. They begin the preparations to administer the medicine as Won appears to be barely hanging on. Muzong is relieved that he rushed back in time, and he gives her the centipede core. The room becomes tense as the old man uses his technique to transfer some of his ki into Won, desperately urging her to open her eyes. Back to Soryong's group. Soryong is completely exhausted from the journey. He never imagined the Central Plains were this vast. They had taken a boat route from Hainan and traveled for almost a month and a half. But after all that walking, they finally arrive in Sichuan, home of the Tang clan. They introduce the clan to Soryong, who is stunned by its sheer scale. The entire mountain they're standing on belongs to the clan. In fact, the mountain itself was named after the Tang clan. He barely has time to take it all in before the clan members come rushing over to welcome Patriarch Keel-san back home. In the distance, a girl in a red dress is running toward them. The moment she spots Keel-san, she shouts, "Father." Now fully recovered, Won dashes toward him, crying tears of joy. They embrace, and she apologizes for causing so much worry. Soryong, seeing her for the first time, can't help but think she's beautiful. He recalls that in his past life he had dated a celebrity, but even then, none of them radiated the kind of presence that Won does. Keel-san then formally introduces her to Soryong, who is still standing there, unable to even blink after seeing the girl. Won finds him a bit strange at first, but when her father tells her that Soryong once called her a flower, her face turns bright red. That's when he remembers Keel-san once described her as one of the 3 great flowers of the Central Plains, but Soryong completely ignored it at the time because he was more interested in hearing about the 10 beasts. Well, he can't ignore her now because she's standing right in front of him. We then see a flashback of Tang Weian's life, the only daughter of the Tang clan, known as the Venomous Flower. She has carried a burden that no one truly understands since childhood. In the past, the elders of the clan claimed that Weian's appearance wasn't good enough for her to be considered one of the 3 flowers of Murim. They believed it would be better to find a suitable son-in-law to inherit the clan's martial arts. Some even suggested that Keel-san should take a second wife to ensure a proper heir, but the patriarch rejected the idea without hesitation. Won agreed with her father's decision and vowed to prove to the elders that her parents were right. From that day on, she trained as hard as she could to master the Tang clan's martial arts, determined to prove her worth even though she wasn't a man. But haste is the enemy of perfection, and if you're impatient during training, you lose your way. In her case, things went very wrong. She lost control during training and developed an inner demon, which caused her ki to become unstable. This imbalance nearly made her lose her ki entirely, leaving her on the brink of death. Back to the past, right after Muzong used the centipede core to heal her, Won finally wakes up. The first thing she does is burst into tears and apologize to her mother for all the trouble she caused. She thinks about how she only wanted to be useful to the clan, but now that she has lost all her ki, she believes it's all over. She tells her grandfather about this, but he reassures her not to worry. He asks if she's apologizing for making him and her father suffer, but tells her that, in the end, she should actually be happy because she has finally learned the 100 poisons technique that she had always wanted. She looks at her palm and realizes that she can use her aura again, but something feels different. Her grandfather notices but tells her there's something he must explain first. He then tells her the entire story of Soryong, the young warrior who not only helped save her life and restore her ki, but was also the reason she was able to learn a new technique. Not the 100 poisons technique, but the 1000 poisons technique. Back to the present. Won is literally speechless upon meeting the protagonist. Meanwhile, Soryong doesn't even know where to look. He just realized that this entire time, he had been calling her a plant. He mentally scolds his past self, saying that he should really reflect on his mistakes. He turns to Won and tells her that the patriarch went too far with his little joke. Then, he formally introduces himself. Soryong tells her that he knew about her illness, but is happy to see that she has recovered. The girl then smiles and formally introduces herself, saying that she is Tang Won, the venomous flower. She thanks him for saving her life and vows never to forget his kindness for as long as she lives. If Soryong wasn't already in love before, this moment completely seals the deal for him. Then, he suddenly starts hearing Keel-san's voice in his head. But no, it's actually Keel-san himself talking right next to him. And he is very eager to push his daughter towards Soryong, asking if he wouldn't like to get to know her better. Soryong, once again, has no idea where to look after that comment. Luckily for him, the scene cuts to later that day as he goes to take a bath after the long journey. The centipedes finally let go of him after he told them to wait in a bucket while he bathed. It almost seemed like they understood what he was saying. It's as if they could sense and even react to Soryong's intentions, like how they reacted when he had killing intent during the fight against Rakshasa. He remembers that Gupei, one of the patriarch's soldiers, once mentioned that these centipedes are actually spiritual creatures and that he should ask more about them later. But at the moment, Soryong can't stop thinking about what Keel-san said about getting to know his daughter better. Deciding it's best to clear his head, he finishes his bath quickly. Cut to the patriarch and his family talking. Keel-san says he will assign Soryong a room in the eastern wing of the clan's estate. Muzong, his father, asks if he really believes that Soryong is as talented as he claims. Keel-san insists that their meeting wasn't a coincidence. He explains that not only does Soryong Soryong have deep knowledge of venomous creatures, but he killed Eun-yang, one of the greatest threats to the Tang clan. And on top of that, he even managed to find one of the legendary creatures. The family is impressed by Soryong's abilities, but Keel-san brings up another topic. He turns to Won and announces that he is planning to make Soryong his son-in-law, asking what she thinks about the idea. Won does not look happy about it. She falls silent for a moment, thinking that just when she finally learned the Thousand Poisons technique and could be useful to the clan, this idea of marriage comes up. She looks at her father and tells him that she is also a member of the Tang clan and understands what he means. But then, she suddenly stands up in frustration. She declares that if this young warrior truly thinks he deserves to marry her, then that is something she must determine for herself. She then rushes off to find Soryong. Keel-san chuckles and tells Soryong to be careful, because no matter how beautiful his daughter is, she also has thorns, just like a rose. Won, meanwhile, is determined. She has come too far to master the clan's techniques. If she stops now, the elders who once looked down on her will never recognize her as worthy. So she must evaluate Soryong herself to see if he is truly deserving. Speaking of Soryong, he is sitting alone thinking about Won. He knows that she probably resents him and wonders what he should do. So naturally, he asks the centipedes for advice. But before he gets an answer, Won suddenly appears, startling him. She wastes no time and, with a serious expression, asks for his hand. Soryong, completely caught off guard, has no idea what's going on. He asks if it wouldn't be better for them to get to know each other first before talking about marriage. But she interrupts him. She wasn't asking for his hand in marriage. She was literally asking for his hand. Soryong realizes he completely misunderstood. After an awkward silence, Won clarifies that she only wanted to check the protagonist's pulse, not propose marriage to him, at least, not yet. She sits down beside him and apologizes for suddenly showing up and acting rudely. She notes that although he hasn't reached adulthood yet, he seems very mature. If only she knew who he really is. Then, she tells her entire story to Soryong. She explains that as the only daughter of the Tang clan's main house, she was constantly targeted by the secondary family schemes. The elders plan to bring in a son-in-law more capable than her to take over the clan. She tells him that his position in the family would change entirely if he married her. Once again, she apologizes and tells him that there's something she needs to confirm with him. However, she reassures him that no matter the outcome, she has no intention of treating him poorly. After all, he was the one who saved her life. So, she says they will treat him either as an honored guest or perhaps even as a sworn brother. Soryong says it's fine and offers his hand for her to examine, telling her to confirm whatever she needs. Won then places her fingers on his pulse and begins feeling his aura. She explains that not everyone can learn the Tang clan's techniques. Some people's bodies naturally adapt to the toxins they use, while others simply cannot handle them. It's a technique that requires gradual exposure to poisons while developing one's internal energy. It starts with 5 venoms and gradually increases to 100. Only by accepting all of them can one achieve mastery. After finishing her examination, she concludes that Soryong's body is indeed capable of learning the poison techniques. However, his body is a 10 venoms body, meaning he can only become resistant to 10 toxins. Luckily, there are only 10 legendary beasts, so he'll just have to work with that. She notes that this is quite impressive, especially for someone who wasn't born into the Tang clan. However, in terms of general talent, she says Soryong will only ever reach the level of a first-class martial artist, which is the absolute limit for someone without innate talent. After that, she excuses herself and thanks him for his understanding. Soryong's reaction. Once she leaves, Soryong realizes the worst possible news. Since he can only withstand 10 poisons, that means he won't be able to capture the Jinyao, a bird capable of using every type of poison. To him, this is the worst fate imaginable. Meanwhile, Won goes to take a bath. While washing up, she notices that ever since she woke up with the centipede core inside her, her body has been emitting a strange scent. She's been bathing multiple times a day to get rid of it, but nothing seems to work. As she gets dressed, she wonders if this is some kind of punishment for how ungrateful she was to Soryong, the person who saved her life. Back to Soryong, despite receiving such devastating news, he is sleeping peacefully. However, he starts having a strange dream about Won. Except, she's talking in a really weird way. He asks if this is really a dream, and the voice replies that it may seem like one, but everything is real. The figure admits that she only took on Wion's form so as not to scare him. In truth, she is the mother of the blue-spotted centipedes. Soryong has no idea what's going on, and suddenly, 3 young girls appear and hug him. He realizes that these must be the daughters of this woman. Confused, he asks why she appeared in his dream. She explains that she was killed mercilessly and has been harboring deep resentment. However, for now, her spirit is trapped inside the centipede core. She had been inside Wion's body but saw a chance to release her resentment, which is why she appeared in Soryong's dream. She calls him her benefactor and tells him that this was only possible because he took care of her children. At that moment, Soryong realizes something terrible. In the end, he was the one responsible for leading people to the centipede, which caused its death. Despite this, the mother asks him for a favor. Soryong, without thinking twice, says that he will do whatever she asks. She asks him to continue taking care of her daughters until they are fully grown. Won. She explains that the young centipedes need to be near the key of the person who possesses their mother's core, which, in this case, is Won. Seoryong realizes that for them to survive, they must remain close to Won until they mature. The mother of the centipedes then reveals something shocking. The scent coming from Won's body is a curse. She cursed Won so that no man would ever get close to her again, making it impossible for her to bear children. However, she makes a deal. If Seoryong allows the young centipedes to stay near Won so they can absorb her ki, she will remove the curse. And in return, he might even have the chance to win Won's heart. Seoryong, however, immediately refuses. He says that he doesn't want to take advantage of Won's misfortune. The centipede mother acknowledges that he is a noble person but asks how he plans to overcome this challenge. She points out that Won is looking for a strong man and currently, she cannot provide him with one of the 10 sacred beast cores. However, when Seoryong hears 10 sacred beasts, an idea suddenly comes to mind. He doesn't explain what it is yet, but he simply asks her to trust him. Everything will work out. The next day, Seoryong calls Won to talk and explains everything that the centipede mother told him. He tells her that if she lets the young centipedes attach to her and absorb her ki, the scent will disappear immediately. Won asks if he's really willing to share his centipedes without asking for anything in return. She points out that he could have requested something as compensation. Seoryong, however, rejects the idea entirely. He says that he could never take advantage of a woman in such an unfortunate situation. After hearing this, Won accepts his help without offering anything in return. She then says that she will heed her father's words. She calls Seoryong her brother and tells him that talking to him made her realize something. There are things far more valuable than innate talent or martial prowess. Seoryong then tells her that he also realized something. Since he can only store 10 toxins at a time, he decides that he will use these 10 slots to store the venoms of the 10 most venomous creatures of the Central Plains. After hearing this, Won recognizes the sheer determination in his words. She realizes that he is trying to become the strongest because of her. In all her years, this is the first time a man has made such a bold confession to her. She asks him if he realizes what he just said, but the protagonist seems completely unaware. Won then explains that this path to becoming the strongest is incredibly difficult. It could take 10 or even 20 years, or perhaps an entire lifetime to achieve. Then, she says that since there are 3 years left until he reaches adulthood and is eligible for marriage, if he manages to defeat at least one of the 10 legendary beasts by then, she will accept marrying him. Immediately after saying that, she stands up, flustered, embarrassed that she even voiced such a thing. Before leaving, she wishes him good luck. However, the protagonist stops her and tells her that she should take one of the centipedes with her for now, so they can start absorbing her ki. He reassures her that they don't bite, so there's nothing to worry about. But when he hands it to her, he absent-mindedly says, "You need to stay with your mommy now, instead of your daddy." And that single sentence makes Won absolutely die of embarrassment. Now, the protagonist has a lot of work ahead of him. He must train hard to become stronger, face the sacred beasts, win his future wife's heart, and break her curse. Will he succeed? That's a story for the next video.